Hello and welcome. In this video I will talk about how the works of author H.P. Lovecraft has influenced different media and in particular gaming.
It's like that strange tentacled beast is watching me.
Howard Phillips Lovecraft is by many considered a pioneer in horror writing, and while his stories may not be considered scary or even unsettling from the perspective of the average modern reader, his writing retains a cult following, no pun intended, and continues to inspire adaptations and homages in the works of other authors and filmmakers. In addition to this, there is a fairly large reference to him in gaming, and the term Lovecraftian is a thing, with the labeled products ranging from humorous parodies, simply using certain well-known elements from his writing, such as
the Necronomicon,
all the way to serious attempts at creating reimagined horror stories.
Welcome to Innsmouth, Mr. Walters.
Why is that? And how closely do games and other media mimic his style of writing? Let's analyze his style a bit first. In his writing, Lovecraft, as I will refer to him from here on out, played on the innate human fear of the unknown. This fear is something that is an established factor in modern psychology and probably once had, and possibly still has, an evolutionary reason, as it helped early humans prefer certainty over risk, and perhaps not eat that new mushroom they had found if they hadn't tried it before. Now, as we all know, we have a method for finding out answers to things we don't know, and that is science. As time goes by, it's not far-fetched to assume we acquire more answers and can draw the conclusion that we now have a lot more answers than we did a century ago, and as such it can be argued that fewer things are now unknown and thus are less scary. Lovecraft touches on the subject of science in his writing, as is nicely shown in the opening paragraph of his short story Call of Cthulhu. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. While this reflection on science might have been accurate during his time, is debatable if it is as relevant today. He does, however, place several of his stories in or near a maritime setting, which is suitable considering the deepest oceans are still an area that we haven't explored fully, even in the modern day. Lovecraft stories are also often of an investigative nature, and the main characters are often academics, scientists, or just people of an inquisitive nature. If his previously mentioned reflections on science are in any way indicative of an opinion, one might assume he's trying to portray curiosity as a dangerous trait, one that in his stories often kills the cat, so to speak.
It sure seems so.
My personal opinion is that Lovecraft stories build tension well, but when it comes to the matter of the parts that are supposed to be scary, I don't really feel that. I can, however, understand how these passages were considered scary and unsettling almost a century ago, especially to the average reader of the pulp magazines where many of his stories were originally published, who may or may not have had a higher education. Now, in movie, play, and book writing, it's historically a golden rule, or at least a recommendation, to show don't tell, here explained in a quote by the famous writer Anton Chekhov. Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. This means that you allow the viewer or reader to experience the story through other means than spelling things out. Lovecraft, however, is quite unconventional even for his time in that he often uses the opposite in his writing, telling the reader what to think and feel about certain elements in his stories. And as such there are discrepancies here. Understandably, the movie medium also caters much more to the use of jump scares than the written medium, and so the use of such techniques also differ. it would be a poor attempt at scaring a reader by writing "boo" in a story. I have in the past played the pen and paper role-playing game Call of Cthulhu, published by Chaosium and first released in the early 80s. And as a game type that revolves around storytelling, it to a greater extent allows for staying true to the style of writing that Lovecraft used. This, however, depends heavily on the game master and how that person decides to run their game. On a side note, it's not hard to see how such a game became popular among gaming nerds, as the game usually stars protagonists that aren't the typical power fantasy, but rather bookworms, intellectuals, etc., which might connect more with an audience of people who have similar, more cerebral interests. The legacy of Chaosium's role-playing game Call of Cthulhu has also spawned a number of source books by fans for fans that fill the gaps in the world descriptions, such as Harlem Unbound by Darker Hue Studios, that explores and details the life of as well as casts the player protagonists as African Americans at the height of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s New York City. How does the pen and paper role-playing game fit the storytelling style of Lovecraft? Well, as anyone who has played such games know, they often benefit from the game master telling the players rather than showing them, and there are usually mechanics in place to act as a guide for the players on how to react to the world around them and play their character, as with the use of sanity points in Call of Cthulhu. So maybe this is a type of game that has the means to stay true to Lovecraft's style more than any other. How about board games then? I have played both Arkham Horror and Mansions of Madness, both excellent games. Here, however, the storytelling is absent and the game focus on other things. The game mechanics include puzzle solving in a way that was at the time of these titles' release, if not rare, at least uncommon in board games to my knowledge. They do manage to capture the pessimistic tone of Lovecraft's writing, in that human action is ultimately futile and you are constantly fighting against the odds in the form of ages-old cosmic beings. This brings me to video games. Are they any different? Well, no and yes. While video games may cite Lovecraft as an inspiration, it varies wildly from simple homages such as naming streets after him and using creatures from his Cthulhu mythos, all the way to complete reimaginings of his stories. I would argue that the investigative nature of several of Lovecraft's stories lends itself to being used as a main theme in video games. As such, the video games that center around the inquisitive and exploring nature of the main characters, and even go so far as to have the protagonist be a detective and do actual investigative work, to a great degree enhances this theme. The use of visual cues of some games to symbolize mental strain can be either effective or slightly annoying and repetitive. Some games use these cues in a slightly unnerving manner by showing rather than telling, and the player can just absorb the feeling. At the same time, other games use such effects but add comments by the main character or supporting cast explaining what the effect means in a way that takes away from the feeling that the player might otherwise have when interpreting the sensation on their own. So, considering the differences in Lovecraft's style of writing and all the various works that name him as an inspiration, how does this add up? Well, to be blatantly clear, I think sometimes it's just business and his name is marketable, and that in many cases they slap the term Lovecraftian on the product and sprinkle it with some tentacles and call it a day. In a few cases of video games, however, the creators take one or more solid themes from his stories, enhance them by giving them a central role, enrich the experience through visual cues, and in the end create really nice end products that captures and even magnifies the spirit of what Lovecraft was trying to convey through his stories. And with that, the video is at an end. If you liked the video and would like to see more like it, please consider subscribing. Please rate the video, and if you have any comments, please drop them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.